So I've been out the other night and I did a bit of the old skip hopping. You know the way you do. Now don't worry, VTubes, this lot don't skip. It's a metaphorical term for sort of having a bit of a rummage around in the skips. So anyway, I found this bag, it had a load of books in. So I thought, oh, I'll get them, I'll do them. Weather gets a bit better. Oh, hopefully, once they've stopped wetting their knickers over COVID, we'll be allowed to start having boot sales again. I love a boot sale. So I'm going to take all them books back, give them a bit of a clean up, and then when it comes to spring, I'm going to put them in the boot sale, earn myself a couple of quid. I mean, why not? Waste not, want not, eh? That's what I really call recycling, that is. So anyway, going through these books, there's this bloke, Mark Twain, or whatever his name was, and I was reading all about him, this, that, the other, one thing, another, what he did. And I thought, hang about, this sort of rings a bell with me, because I reckon I know what happened here, you know, with your Mark Twain and all those postmodern literature people or whatever. I reckon that Mark Twain, I reckon he was going down the road one day, and I think somebody went up to him, they said, Mr. Twain, can we ask you a question? And he said, you have to be quick because I'm on my way to Walmart. He said, so make it quick. They said, no, it's all right. We just want to ask you one question. All we want to know is, what made you write your book? He said, what made me write my book? They said, yes, what made you write your book? He said, that's easy. He said, you remember that one that wrote that book about the Uncle Tom what lived in a cabin in the woods? They said, yes. He said, They said no. He said yes. He said it was Harriet Beecher Stowe made me write my book. Oh, they said. He said, is that it? They said yes. He said anyway, as he's turned round, he said, have a look. They said, who's that? Your Mark Twain said, that's your Ernest Hemingway. They've looked round. Coming down the road was an old bloke. He had his fishing rods, he had his galoshes on. I think he had his sandwiches wrapped up in a bit of oil-proof paper, you know, like they used to do. And he's strutting down the road like that, not a care in the world. They said, no, that's your Mark Hemingway. Mark Twain said, yes, that's your Ernest Hemingway, that is. Oh, they said, well, while we were here, we're going to go and ask him the question. So I went running up. They said, excuse me, Mr. Hemingway, excuse me, I want to ask you a question. He said, I can't stop now. He said, I'm going fishing. They said, well, I only want to ask you a quick question. He said, go on then, make it quick. They said, who made you write your book? He said, my book? He said, well, it's funny now you ask that. I am sort of a bit Scott Fitzgerald, you know, but no, I'll be honest, I'll tell you exactly who made me write my book. Him. They said who? He said him. And he pointed at Mark Twain. They said, no, Mark Twain made you write your book. He said, yes. He said, if you really want to know the truth, he said, once I read Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, I took myself home and I just threw all my books in the bin, I did, because I thought, well, now you've read that, there ain't really any need for you ever to read another book, and don't bother writing one because, boom, it's too late. Huckleberry Finn. I mean, that's the absolute seminal book in something or other about something to do with the poverty in the deep south and blah, 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 whatever. Oh, they said. So anyway, he's gone off. They said, bye. Mark Twain said, he said, have a look. He said, see them coming round the corner? They've looked round. They said, yes. Mark Twain said, you know who they are? They said, who? He said, that's your Truman Capote and that's your Jack Kerouac. They said no. He said yes. He said that's your Truman Capote and your Jack Kerouac. As sure as X is X. They were like, no, we're going to go and ask them the questions. They went running up and said, excuse me, Mr. Kerouac, can we ask you a question? He said, oh, go on then. They said, who made you write your book? He said, well, let me think. Well, I'll be honest, it's him walking down there with the fishing rods. They said, not your Ernest Hemingway. He said, yes. He said, yes, definitely your Ernest Hemingway. Truman Capote's kicked up. Well, he said, you always told me it was me what made you write your books. He said, no, I never did. He said, don't that old rubbish. He said it was your Ernest Hemingway every day of the week. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have even bothered putting pen to paper. Well, your Truman Capote could not believe it. He's like, well, he said, he's sort of in a huff. He said, He said, that's not fair. He said, because all this time you've always said it was me. He said, well, I don't know where you got that from. That's just bullshit. He said, you ain't made me write shit. They said to Truman Capote, who made you write your book? He said, well, I'd rather not say now. They said, no, go on, who made you write your book? He said, no, he said, I ain't going to say. He said, but what I will say is I did invent my own literary genre. That was me, the Truman Capote. Jack Kerouac said, ignore him, he's talking bullshit, he didn't invent nothing, he's just full of it, just ignore him. Truman Capote said, no, shut up. He said, I did. He said, everybody knows I invented your true crime genre, and if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have had no true crime. Oh, they said. Yes, he said, and I'll tell you another thing. He said, do you know who I made write a book? They said, go on. He said, I only made Harper Lee write her book To Kill a Mockingbird. They said, no. Jack Kerouac was laughing. He said, shut up. He said, ignore him, he's mental. He said, I did. Capote said, I did. He said, if it wasn't for me, she wouldn't have wrote that book. The seminal conversation on prejudice in the Deep South in the post-interwar years, etc., something or other. Discrimination, poverty, the same old shit. Oh, that was down to me. You would have never got to read that book if it wasn't for me. They said, oh, they said. Anyway, they've looked round. Jack Kerouac said, have a look. Who's that over there? They said, where? He said, that. He said, that's your J.D. Salinger. They said, no. Kerouac said, yes, that's your J.D. Salinger. They've looked over. The little old man sat in the doorway, looked a little bit dishevelled. He had his sleeping bag with him. I think he was eating a bun out of a Greg's bag or something. Sat there minding his own business. Jack Kerouac, Capote's like, yes, that's definitely your J.D. Salinger. They said, we're going to go over and ask him. They said, don't you dare do that. Don't you go near him. They said, why not? Oh, no, you can't go near him, said Capote. No, we don't have nothing to do with him. He sits alone, he does. He's not invited to any of our literary meetings, he's not involved in our club, and he don't get no awards. He wrote that atrocious book, Catcher in the Rye, which was an insidious book and some sort of social comment on middle-class life in post-war America when kids are middle-class go into cadet military, having their brains washed, and they're just fodder for the military-industrial complex. And if it wasn't for him writing that book, they wouldn't have had to use conscription because everyone would have volunteered for Vietnam, yada, yada, yada. So, we don't have nothing to do with him. They said, oh, is that why every time there's a really bad crime, somebody always manages to pop a copy of Catcher in the Rye at the crime scene? Jack Kerouac said exactly. That's exactly the reason. So none of us have nothing to do with him. He's de rigueur. He is persona non grata. To us, as far as we're concerned, he do not exist. They said, oh. He said, I'll tell you another thing. We all had a meeting about 50 years ago, we did, at our club. And we all discussed that book, that Catcher in the Rye. And I'll tell you something, we've all decided he made that bloody book up, you know. He did. So there you go. Postmodern literature.